Hi, today we're going to do problem 4-1B, financial statements and closing entries. So here we have the Last Chance Company, offers legal consulting advice to prison inmates. Last Chance prepared the end of period spreadsheet that follows June 30th, 2013 at the end of the fiscal year. Now, what we're going to be doing with this, if you can see here, they've given us the spreadsheet that gives us all of the information, their unadjusted trial balance, adjustments, and adjusted trial balance. Step 1, prepare an income statement. Step 2, statement of stockholders' equity. And step 3, balance sheet. We will not be doing these first 3 steps. These are the same as were covered in Chapter 1 in Problem 1-2. So we will not be completing these 3 steps with this chapter because we've already done them. Please feel free to look through your textbook at those 3 steps. There are some more step-by-step directions in there. We're going to start down here on number 4. On the basis of the end of period spreadsheet, journalize the closing entries. Okay, so we're going to pop over to our Excel spreadsheet here, and all we have in our Excel spreadsheet is a general journal. And then if we click the other link, it's going to take us to a post-closing trial balance. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, we're going to pick page 1 for our general journal, and we're going to create our first closing entry. So we need the date. Now to make that date a little Excel tip, I typed in 2013, held down the Alt key, ALT, and pressed enter to make it go down in the same cell. So June 2013, our closing entries are always the last day of the month or last day of the fiscal year. First thing we need to close are our income accounts. Okay, so if we look at our spreadsheet, sorry, I have a million things open here. If we look at our spreadsheet, our income account, let me get my head out of the way. Oh, let's see, we have liabilities, we have unearned rent, common stock. Okay, so here we have fees earned, right? That's our income account. Rent revenue is our income account, and then it goes into our expenses. So we're looking to use from line 23 down to line 33, okay, for this first entry. And we're also going to look at retained earnings, which is our stockholders' equity account, okay? So fees earned has a balance of we're going all the way over here, $283,750, and our rent revenue has a balance of $3,000. So again, we're going to use the numbers out of this adjusted trial balance column. So the first one is going to say fees earned. Whoops. Fees earned had a credit balance, so we're going to debit this to make it, to close it, because we know that debits and credits are opposite of each other. Okay, so fees earned, and then we said rent revenue was our other income account. So we're going to close that one too. Again, fees earned and rent revenue both had credit balances, so we're going to debit them to close them, debit them to subtract that number from their account. Okay. Now, I know something ahead of time, so I'm going to skip a line here, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to list all of those expenses that are on this spreadsheet. So from salaries and wages expense straight on down to miscellaneous expense. Again, I'm pulling these numbers over here out of the adjusted trial balance. Okay, so salaries and wages expense, advertising. And this might be easier if you can print that other page, if you can print the problem out so that you can see it at the same time instead of working from one computer screen. I have 2 computer screens, so I can do this a little easier. But again, if you only have one, you may want to print the actual problem so you can see the problem and your Excel spreadsheet at the same time. The other option is that you can do this by hand, okay? print this form out or print out the PDF, which are identical, and write this out by hand, as some of my videos do show you. So your expenses have a debit balance. If we look at our spreadsheet, we see that their balance, here's your debit column, their balances are in the debit column. We want to close those. We want to make those balances zero. So in order to do that, we're going to credit these accounts. Whoops, what did I do wrong here? I missed something somewhere. Travel, depreciation, supplies. Oh, I missed insurance expense. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do is calculate whether or not we have a net income or a net loss. Now, if we would have completed those financial statements first before we did our closing entries, like the problem asked us to, we would know whether or not we're having a net income or a net loss. But we skipped that step, so we're going to have to calculate this out ourselves. Now, to find the net income or net loss, we simply take the revenue minus the expenses. Okay, so revenue minus our expenses tells us if we have a net income or a net loss. Okay, so our revenue, and I'm going to use some Excel formula here, is try that again, equals this one plus this one. So our revenue is $286,750. And then our expenses, I'm going to use the sum of these, and it's going to tell us, I'm going to stick a negative sign next. We're going to subtract those numbers, $298,750, right? So now if I subtract these numbers, if I subtract this one and this one, I'm going to get a negative $12,025. So I have a net loss. Okay. Now, when you have a net loss, you're going to debit retained earnings, okay, which is why I left this blank space up here, because I knew ahead of time, I did the problem ahead of time. So I knew that we had a net loss. So I'm going to debit retained earnings. Okay. So this equals a debit to retained earnings. Now, if I had a net income, which hopefully most of our companies do, I would do a credit to retained earnings. Okay, so there is a little bit of a difference there. Again, when we subtracted our revenues minus our expenses and got our net income or loss, it turned out to be a loss. Okay, so a net loss, we debit retained earnings. A net income, we credit retained earnings. Now, the other thing we need to do, because we're in Excel, if you were handwriting this, you would just do this automatically. We need to indent those account titles. All I did was highlight them, and then there's an indent button. Your Excel might look a little bit different if you're using the online version, but there's a button somewhere that says increase indent and looks like this one. Okay. So that is our first closing entry. The next thing that we need to close, let's look at our problem here. We said we did fees earned, we used retained earnings, fees earned, rent revenue, and all of our expenses. We have dividends on line 22. That's kind of stuck in the middle. We need to close our dividends account, and we'll look over here. Dividends has a debit balance of $20,000, so we need to credit dividends. So we're going to start a new entry. We're going to move those dividends into our retained earnings account. So that was $20,000. Oh my goodness. This is what I get for getting up early to do a video. Okay, so we're going to credit dividends and debit retained earnings. Again, I'm going to indent that word dividends because it's the credit line. We want those credits indented. We learned that in chapter 2. Okay. So we closed our revenue accounts by debiting them. We closed our expenses by crediting them and put the difference in our retained earnings. We closed dividends by crediting it and put the difference in retained earnings. The next thing we're going to do is a post-closing trial balance. Okay, first thing we do on a post-closing trial balance is we list the company name. In our situation, it's the Last Chance Company. Post-closing trial balance is a snapshot on one specific day. Okay. In Excel, when your date doesn't do what you want it to do, you could pop in here. I'm going to go to more, change my date, change the way my date looks to the way it should look. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the numbers from this spreadsheet. I'm going to take all the accounts from this spreadsheet from cash down to retained earnings. So only from lines 8 through 21. And I'm going to take their balances out of the adjusted trial balance with the exception of retained earnings because we just calculated the new balance there. Lines 22 through 33 have been closed, so their balances are 0. Okay, so we will not put those on our post-closing trial balance. Again, you may want to print that page, print that problem, or have two screens, one maybe your cell phone and one your computer. Or again, you can write all this out. Okay. So I'm just pulling those numbers off of the problem. And you'll see there is a column here for the account number, okay? Depending on what company you're with, depending on what type of accounting software you have, that account number may or may not appear on your post-closing trial balance. Okay? In our case, there is a column for it. I'll explain why I can't type and talk at the same time. There is a column for it because at one point the problem gave us the account numbers. I don't know that this one does. This one does not. So we're going to leave that column empty. But again, you could fill in the account numbers there if you choose to do so. In some companies, the computer will automatically fill those account numbers in for you as it pulls the information out of the ledger, which is where our account numbers are kept. So I did not change any of these balances from that spreadsheet. I am just bringing them from the spreadsheet into my post-closing trial balance, just to show what accounts are still active at the end of my fiscal year. Excuse me, to show what their balances are at the end of the fiscal year. Now, my last one here is retained earnings. Okay, so we're going to calculate our new retained earnings balance. Our balance, if we look at our problem, let me drag the problem over here. Retained earnings has a balance of $271,300. Okay, so $271,300 is our balance. Balance in retained earnings. Extract that so it stays where it's supposed to be. And then we are going to subtract the $12,025 because that is a debit. So retained earnings has a credit balance. We're going to subtract that debit of $12,025. And we're also going to subtract that $20,000 of retained earnings. Okay, so this was our net loss. This was our dividends. And this is going to give us our new balance. The reason why I can add those three numbers together is because of the subtraction signs here. It automatically subtracts them. So the new balance to retained earnings is $239,275. So that's the number we're going to put over here under retained earnings is $239,275. Okay. $239,275 is my new balance in retained earnings. Now I have my totals row, so I'm going to add these up. I'm going to use Excel to add these up. You can use a calculator and type the number in. If you're writing them, you can obviously use a calculator and just write the number in. If you need to add up each column, you can't just assume. You can't just add up the first column and assume that the second one is the same, because you never know, it might not be. They do balance, which is fantastic. That's exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to take these two numbers, they need a single line atop, and they need a double bottom border. Okay. So I'm going to do the bottom double border, and I'm actually going to do the thick bottom border to the cells above it, just to make it look like, otherwise you're not going to be able to see it because the lines are already there. So we have a thick border atop and a double underline to say, yes, this is correct. And our problem is complete. Okay. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Use the inbox on the left side of your Canvas classroom, and I will get back to you as soon as I see it and can. Have a great day.